we've covered extensively how the Palestinian propaganda machine works, how the media tells you parts of what is happening, things that are not happening, and how they justify telling you that, often with proof from the so-called experts, human rights organizations, the UN, and the like. Some of the stuff that we've heard, of course, is genocide, starvation. We've heard of starvation without being able to see a single picture of a starving person. That's kind of weird as photographed wars go. You usually expect to see that. We haven't, but people have heard what the media is telling them. Many people have taken to the streets around the world to protest it. And yesterday, I would say the media's most successful sort of act inspired by the media occurred when a terrorist stabbed 5 people in Tel Aviv before being eliminated. This terrorist was a Moroccan citizen with a green card who came into Israel. There was a lot of open questions about how he was let in. There were issues at border control. They didn't want to let him in. Then the Shin Bet eventually agreed to let him in. But from his social media posts, this is very much a person who bought into everything he heard from mainstream news coverage of the Middle East and decided to do something about it. Welcome to the reality show. This is another one of those shows where we're going old school, as we did in the early days of the show, and we're doing more than one topic. So this is not going to be the only topic today. Later on, we're going to talk about some of Trump's more interesting actions so far as president. But yeah, this terrorist attack yesterday, I don't know how to put it. Luckily, nobody died, but people were injured, and I think one was severely injured. And again, it's one of the positive outcomes from what has happened recently is that more Israelis are armed. In this case, this was soldiers, but more Israelis are armed. So these attacks often end quicker than they otherwise would have. But yeah, I mean, the media can really celebrate their success on this. Is that am I being too harsh here, Chris?
No, Razia, I wouldn't be that harsh on your assessment. I mean, two things to keep in mind in terms of facilitating sort of terrorist action. So number one, you need obviously the logistical side. So you need, the finances or the ammunition or the firearms or any of the sort of operational side. But on the other side, and when we get to things like media commentary and analysis, you need the ideological motivation or the it's not the right word, the values, the negative values that motivate such action. And partly that is driven by the sort of analysis and commentary that we see, unfortunately, in lots of platforms and lots of avenues. So if you have an organization such as Hamas, Hezbollah, a few others, proxy bodies of the regime in Iran, the resources that they afford and that they continue to be afford, despite the ceasefire that has been announced. I think one can get into the technicalities around whether this particular ceasefire, the merits thereof, and that it continues to allow Hamas to exist in its current form. So if you've got that continuing, combined with the motivations, the ideological side of it, this sort of thing, unfortunately, I think happens more regularly than one would want. I think you're exactly right to highlight the positives in terms of the ultimate outcomes. You can't control for this sort of thing necessarily. That would mean, massive infringement on individual liberties preemptively and sort of profiling, all that sort of stuff. So you want citizens to be free, for example, to arm themselves, to be equipped, to defend themselves, their liberty, their families, their property. But I think for the time being, given that we've still got the mainstreaming and platforming of some of these ideas, we're going to continue seeing these sorts of actions.
Yeah. Alejandro, I don't think you're very active on social media, right? I think you and I always trade these Game of Thrones memes, but other than that, yeah, I don't think you spend much time on Twitter, but I'm sure you've seen the kind of social media posts that are so clearly informed entirely by mainstream media coverage of the war and are completely nonsensical. And, when the media does it, they have to do it with, well, experts from, the UN, Francesca Albanese, the Amnesty International, whoever. They have to do that kind of stuff. When it trickles down, people are less careful with how they put it, and of course, when it fully trickles down, it could trickle out down into the kind of action that we see in the streets of London on Saturdays and elsewhere around the world, and to what we saw yesterday in Tel Aviv.
Certainly. Knowledge moves in waves. And if you don't have the academic slash NGO background that justifies whatever you want to justify, whatever trickles down goes over. And think about uh, useless notions like flat earthers. Uh, the reason that you like that they don't have a movement as such, that they are parodied in so many uh, spaces, it's because they first of all, it's silly what they propose, but second of all, it's because they don't have any academic NGO standing that gives them any type of sanction. If they did, if they managed to crawl into academia and universities and the UN or whatever body you wanted to crawl, then they would have some degree of legitimacy, and therefore any kind of justification in social media or more informal grounds would be more useful. Um, that and what happens is usually that whenever you want to justify any kind of movement like this, is you more or less say something that it's um, relatively agreeable in academia, something that it's relatively rational, and then as it trickles down into the more informal means, then the message becomes weirder and weirder and more backwards. But at the same time, usually with these evil movements, it becomes more consistent. Any breaks that you have whenever you want to propound something like this via your NGO or via your academia get washed away, and the real evil means show up. I mean, there's a degree of things that a person like Finkelstein can say to keep his legitimacy. People in social media don't have to keep anything to keep it up.
Yeah, I love the flat earthers analogy because flat earthers are widely ridiculed and absolutely deserve it, but so many others have earned the at least the same amount of ridicule and don't get it and are considered mainstream. So many other ideas that are as uh, evidence and reality based as the idea of a flat earth. So yeah, Daniel, you are probably more on social media because of your age, I'm assuming. Sorry, I'm being a bit ageist, but you know me already. So, but yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, something because you mentioned earlier about the starvation in Gaza and how we've never really seen any photos. And it's important to mention that whenever you see photos that are supposedly from Gaza, something to remember is whenever they show the supposed photos, it's always like one child or like one person sort of seeing. And that's not how starvation works. Starvation is not like few people here and there are sort of like in bad state or sort of it's a whole population. I mean, look up starvation from example Yemen or from anywhere else. It's like a bunch of people basically being, because starvation when you don't have access to food is global. It's not something that few people sort of have it that somehow other ones don't. And also, since people say how many sort of the goal of calories a day is sort of achieve, people are trying to achieve in Gaza, they actually are consuming more calories a day than I do because I'm trying to lose weight. So I'm much lower currently than an average Gazan is. So much about Israeli starvation. But yeah, when it comes to this, I think again, what is really disturbing about this part is that this is a U.S. not a citizen, but a permanent resident, someone who can live, and I think permanent residents even might have a path to citizenship, or basically some naturalization. So this is like someone living in a greatest country in the world, having all opportunities he could possibly ever hope for, and goes to Israel for a few days and tries to kill people. Doesn't manage so, but does it. What kind of culture are we living in that this is something that happens? And you could go even some time back when there was the American soldier, I think his name was Bushnell, who set himself on fire for sort of the sake of Gaza or whatever it was. Or earlier, I think a month ago, I think it was in December, the case of Luigi, who killed the United Healthcare CEO, and that was someone who was also applauded for it. So this we're living in like a really disturbing culture, and yeah, I think media and organizations are helping this, especially when it comes to Gaza. I mean, or sort of Israel. I almost from day one we've been hearing that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. There is a case, there is an ICJ case against Israel that started, I think, around December or January, like early, like last year, basically just few months into the conflict, and it's sort of like going through, and it's being used, is sort of being referred to as evidence for against Israel. You have Amnesty International trying to redefine genocide, trying to make it so people actually think that what Israel is doing. You have articles being published in prestigious journals such as The Lancet, where they argue, the numbers are actually much higher. And if you thought that the numbers we have right now are too much, look at these numbers; these are even bigger. And that's the only thing you're sort of getting in the Western media right now, or for the most part, it is. And when that's all you have, I mean, what this individual did is still disturbing, and the fact that there was no self-reflection, there was at no point sort of is what's happening. If I'm actually gonna stop people, do I actually check if what's actually being told to me, is it actually true? But still, the fact that there is so much almost like united hatred for Israel, united sort of position against Israel, makes it so that yes, stuff like this can happen uh, when you turn against civilization so much. Yeah, this is what happens when you turn against what is right, because what Israel is doing is absolutely right. There is nothing, or when you have sort of Western uh, um, basically view of the world, rights respecting view of the world, everything Israel is doing is in accordance to that. And only if you have I think, a much different point of view, you can sort of even basically try to do something like this.
Yeah, and we've done episodes about the Lancet and how they arrive at their numbers, which were the starting point is fully believing everything Hamas says, and so much in how they get to where they get, and how other human rights organizations and the like get to whatever conclusions they get, and then how the media reports it. So much of it you don't need to, we don't have people on the ground in Gaza. You just need to read it, critically rather than accept it, as gospel to actually say, no, this is bullshit at this level. So the things that are built upon it are completely irrelevant and need to be thrown out. Um, Chris, you lift heavy weight, so I think 3,000 calories some days would be the starvation in your case. But uh, I don't think anybody is providing those calories for you. Whereas in the case of Gaza, the starting point is Israel was forced into a war by the people of Gaza, and now it has to feed them while trying to fend them off, which is that alone is very unique. And of course, that alone is that is not something that is being questioned by the likes of Bushnell, who also very much sounded like this guy who committed the attack yesterday.
Yeah, if you talk about sort of perfect moral equality, or at least equality of outcomes, when you've got that sort of underlying idea as part of your worldview, which for him, I mean, might not have been explicit, but is so a part of what we're faced with nowadays from all sorts of commentators in the media, academia, everywhere, where there's no countries and governments based on how they conduct themselves. There's just complete equivalence. There's no separation of them. So a country that acts in self-defense, for example, as the IDF has done, they're equated with, you know, the worst human rights violators in the world. There's no differentiation. So then for someone who takes that to its logical conclusion, when they take this sort of action, they don't see what they're doing necessarily, you know, in an evil or immoral way. I think at the same time, also seeing things in a very collectivist, from a very collectivist lens, when it's just the Jews or Israel, or, you know, take your pick. It's not individual human beings that you interact with, but because you've been fed the steady stream, and of course you take the choice and the actions yourself, but just what you're faced with, and sort of the barrage that you're, you know, that you are under. If that's what you accept, that every single human being is, you know, the same as everyone else, that you don't treat people as individuals based on their actions, you don't punish or reward them based on how they act, then you're also going to see this sort of thing happening more and more, unfortunately. So it's a necessary consequence, I suppose, of some of these underlying philosophical streams that we have in our culture nowadays, unfortunately.
Yeah. Chuck Norris Gun Club asks this in reference to the stabbing in Tel Aviv. Yes, the stabbing yesterday in Tel Aviv. There was a stabbing a few days ago in Tel Aviv as well. Yeah, we are, of course, putting a lot of the blame on evil organizations and media organizations and the like. But this is an individual who has free will and bears responsibility for his actions. Alejandro.
I agree, Rossi, and certainly not only that, it's the fact that if you were surrounded by media that told you that Israel is a devil, that Israel is what's wrong, that Israel is the what is driving the whole problem in the Middle East, even if you thought about that, if you were rational, your reaction would be, well, I'm going to do something to remediate that. And even if you're a violent person, like this monster was, what you would do would be very different than attacking civilians. This is so. This reveals psychologically another factor at play. The whole notion that you can hate the good for being the good, and that you want to destroy it to a certain extent. What the media, the whole whitewashing of the problem, on who is right and who is wrong, and what and the faking of what the real problem is a great excuse for monsters to appear and say, hey, I'm actually not the devil, I'm actually a protector, I'm the good one here. But if you think about that, imagine this is what I was talking to Daniel a couple of minutes ago. If you imagine yourself going back to the 1940s in Nazi Germany, and you were living in another country, and you are quite worried about what's happening, you don't go and kill German civilians unless you're in war. That's another issue. You don't go and kill innocent civilians. You maybe try to do it another way, or maybe you could attack certain parts of the government. I'm not saying that you should do it, but this is actually just a psychological revelation that the motivation is something different than just trying to correct an issue. And I think it's quite an ugly revelation as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it is, this attack is perfectly in line with what the Palestinian cause actually is, which is getting rid of the Jews. So the 5 people stabbed, I actually don't know for certain that they're all Jews. It was Tel Aviv, unlike anywhere else in the Middle East. In Israel, it could be Jews and it could be Arabs. But yeah, it is something that that the Palestinians would applaud and would of course do themselves and have done. Davy Boy mentions Hamas doesn't claim the numbers that the Lancet does. Yeah, even the Lancet doesn't claim the numbers that the Lancet does. It claims one number, and one is a study, and one is a maybe. There's people who are going to die after the war, and so on. And of course, when they first gave that 180,000 figure, they walked it back a little bit, at least in the way that people were using it, because people were saying, "Oh, 180,000 people died in Gaza," and the Lancet had to clarify that they say, after the war is over, with people who will die afterwards as a result of the war, it could get up to 180,000. Which, of course, there are so many qualifiers there that you can get away with anything and any number. Yeah, WUB says. Probably my opinion, there are or were starvation in pockets of Gaza as Hamas stole the aid. Yeah, that's, again, we don't actually know that there is actual starvation, but we do know that Hamas stole the aid. I mean, we know there was a story before Israel even went into Rafah. There was some leaders of the whatever branch of Hamas was in control of what was coming in, were killed by Israel in an aerial strike, and prices went down. And Palestinians told us on social media that prices went down, and they're going through markets and saying, "Oh, look, prices are now down. I wonder why that is." So we absolutely know that Hamas wants Palestinians to suffer and has always really not tried much to hide it, because they know that if Palestinians suffer, those are images that can be used in the by Western can and will be used by Western media to blame Israel for that situation and get support around the world for Hamas. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, just on the Lancet numbers, my favorite thing, and a short was released on X from us from ARCUK recently when I said it. There is a non-zero chance, according to Lancet, that all people in Gaza are dead. Just like a heads up, according to their sort of I don't know what to even call it, the potential aspect that's going on, or sort of the potential that the numbers came from, or the 186,000 number came from. Now, going back to this guy, I mean, it's always hard to sort of imagine someone like this and imagine if, like, what would he do if he was thinking rationally, because his underlying ideas are so irrational. And if from his perspective, again, if you think Israel is committing genocide and United States are literally helping it, Donald Trump was now elected, so there's not going to be any change, and it's the only choice you have to go into Israel and start killing random Israelis. I mean, it's sort of similar to the Bushnell case, who I think he, well, I don't want to psychologize, but I think that there were some chances that he was simply mentally unwell. But yeah, if you are at a state where, basically similar to Bushnell, he thought like there is no other way to sort of stop Israel from committing genocide than setting himself on fire to sort of bring more eyes to the issue, or sort of make sure people know what's going on. And I believe when it comes to this guy, we have no idea why he did it yet, at least as of right now. We might learn more stuff later. Um, but yeah, if we are dealing with someone who thinks there is no more sort of rational way out or sort of ways to fight the so-called genocide, that you would just go into Israel and start killing random people. I mean, there is no rationality you can sort of refer back to. That it's gone, both from the aspects or from the ways he chose to act and from the underlying ideas. I mean, if you think since October 7th, if you think Israel is literally committing genocide, there is almost no it's similar. We did one episode when we talked about the Israeli diaspora. I hope I pronounced it right. Basically, sort of, people just don't understand what's going on, and if we explain it to them, they'll know that Israel is in the right. But we are like 15 or 16 months in, and if you are someone who still believes Israel is committing genocide, or that Palestinians and Hamas are separate entities and don't have anything to do with each other. And only if we get rid of Hamas, then Palestinians will thrive. Palestinians will want to live peacefully with Israelis. Or if we just give them Gaza and the West Bank, all of the West Bank, and leave that area, that they'll be more peaceful. Since they'll get the so-called their land back, they'll be peaceful now. It's like, well, what rationality can I refer to if you still believe all that? What is there to even talk about? I mean, you clearly have no respect for any sort of rational discourse, or any sort of like actual solutions to the conflict, or any sort of like your fundamental understanding of the situation is so wrong that what am I even trying to appeal to when talking to someone like that?
Yeah, and like I said, there are questions about how this guy got into Israel. There's also some question about why he went. I mean, in my mind, why he went to America. I fully understand why somebody from a country like Morocco, which is one of the better Arab countries, but that's not that's not exactly
Because
high
it's the
praise.
furthest from Israel. That's why.
Yeah. Why I fully understand why somebody would want to leave Morocco and come to the United States, but ideologically, I don't think this guy, would share my view there. And yeah, so there's questions that I have about that, but there's also questions that we have now about 2 days into Trump's presidency, and his making America great again. Will things like this be prevented? And generally speaking, Trump, one of the executive orders he has signed is to end birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants. Am I getting that right? Chris, your thoughts on that, and generally on the new president of the United States. This is your first episode of the reality show under the Trump presidency. Are you tired of winning already?
Well, I will say before any substantive quality, I do applaud our great leader. We in South Africa are thankful Donald Trump is president, and I hope any criticism is taken in that vein. Now, I obviously say that tongue in cheek, but I also say that, in some elements quite seriously for some viewers in countries like the US and the UK that take for granted things like free speech and criticizing your politicians. So, despite some of the worst excesses of both Republicans and Democrats, there still is that freedom of speech largely, and don't take that sort of thing for granted. That isn't the case in many other countries around the world. On the Trump administration, second administration specifically, I think a lot of the first executive orders, the part of the strategy, if we want to call it that, is not having his own necessary vision or idea, but to just see how other people react. So if you do this flurry of executive orders, things like ending birthright citizenship, lots of tariffs, the threat of a 25% tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada by the 1st of February, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, all sorts of other withdrawals, but also signals to other countries. You want to see how other politicians react. And for Trump, who is so ego driven, and I don't say ego in the positive sense, but who needs and wants that fulfillment so desperately, regardless of what source, whether it's a good or bad source that it comes from. You want other business people, you want other presidents, prime ministers to come to you as supplicants to say, look, what can we negotiate? What can we do to ensure the worst case scenario doesn't happen? So it's trying to get people to react, creating a big impact. I think that's partly what's driving all of this. I mean, in terms of just the impact for American citizens, things like what ostensibly, in the best case scenario, people voted for Trump on, things like inflation concerns, bringing down grocery prices. I don't see any of the first moves doing anything substantive in that line. You can have things like declaring that there are only two genders, being a very performative element. It's sort of smoke and mirrors in my assessment. I'm hoping that there's more concrete good action, positive action for the right reasons, not just to quote unquote own the left or to be vindictive or vengeful. But for now, I'm seeing a continuation of the first administration. I hope that the higher growth rates and things like that for the US continues, and that standard of living for US citizens. But for right now, I think this is going to typify the Trump administration. He wants to appear volatile, wants to appear uncertain on the global stage to keep his adversaries on a sort of uneven footing. I know he also put out a statement on Russia and Ukraine and said that Russia has been losing badly. I'm paraphrasing, but it's time for Putin to come to the negotiating table. I haven't yet seen other sources corroborating this, that it's good or bad for Ukraine. But my main concern is this might put Ukraine in a weaker position because it's first reaching out, at least publicly, signaling something to Putin.
Yeah, I saw that statement as well, and I thought this is better on the face of it than anything you've heard from Trump on this war throughout, which is weird. And also, it's always going to be interesting to see how his supporters, who are much more, many of whom are much more vocally anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia in some cases, how they're going to handle it. But yeah, it also occurred to me a couple of days ago, there were four of us on the reality show, and I think I was the probably the most anti-Trump person on that panel, and here I think I'm probably the least anti-Trump person. So this is going to be interesting in terms of ARCUK's coverage as well. Like I said, the next 4 years, if we're still around for the whole 4 years, will be super interesting in terms of what we cover. Alejandro, one of the things that kind of strike me as worrying around this, not necessarily the ending of birthright citizenship, but the fact that it could be a precedent of changing or attempting to change the Constitution by executive order, and with a Supreme Court that's supposedly seemingly on his side, is that something that could pass?
I think there's a risk of that. I'm certainly not a legal expert on that frame. I remember talking about that in a previous TRS about a year ago. We were talking about this very same topic, and the conservatives back then, they had nudged the notion that this was going to be a 14th Amendment issue. The thing that worries me regarding this executive order is, well, first of all, I think in a much better country, in a very free based country, the notion of citizenship is a minor one, and in my view, I think it should be a matter of someone being willing to be a citizen, that one should have the pride of being one. That is, if one wants to vote and be a jury, it should be a privilege based upon your knowledge of the country, and that would be the only additional rights or privileges that one gets from the citizenship. However, and sadly, we live in a country where citizenship implies that you're allowed to enter into a country, that you are allowed to have a job, that you have a very different treatment against the law. And to that extent, I think it's very worrisome that you want to strip away the citizenship to certain people. You want to strip certain people of rights that should not be that should be granted normally. Now, the executive order as such, I think it has a very big racist element, because what you're doing is you're seeing a set of specific people which will be trained in the US, will interact with Americans all their lives since they're babies, most likely. They will have an American life education, and they will live all their lives as Americans if they have granted the citizenship. What is different from them? Well, in essence, they look different. That's the only thing that will differentiate these kind of people against other Americans. Well, what could be the motivation to do that? You want to remove this kind of people. It's easier if you don't have citizenship to deport you and with the whole family than if you have it. So if you strip the children away from the citizenship, you can take away the whole family way much easier in an easier fashion than not.
Yeah, and I'll repeat my general recommendation when it comes to immigration, which is to have a much stronger criminal justice system, and one where if you are convicted of a crime that something that should be a crime, because there are crimes on the book that should not be crimes, then whatever you get will be much worse than whatever you escaped from to come into the U.S. That will make people reconsider whether they want to whether coming into the U.S. to commit a crime is of any benefit to them. But yeah, Daniel, back to the question of the Constitution. I mean, this is there is more nuance to this, but it is a kind of a I think a bigger deal than many of his executive orders, much of which, as Chris mentioned, are kind of for show.
Just quickly, because someone says it's anyone, not just Mexicans, sort of implying that it's not racist. It's important to remember, especially with things like war on drugs, there is things you can have basically set up like a system which is like, well, it's equal for everyone, while if you look at who it's like targeting more, you can see that it has possible like racist sort of implication behind it or motivation behind it. I think if you check like a specific at least this is what I've heard specific on war on drugs, that like certain drugs that you would find more in African American communities were punished much harder than sort of other drugs. So yes, it can be like equal for everyone, and it can have like racist motivations behind it. Those things I think don't go against each other. So now on the broader issue of basically this executive order, I mean, something to remember when it comes to discussions of this, oftentimes there are, let's say, things that are right from sort of like an objectivist perspective, like what would a moral government look like, what would the ideal government look like, and also when it comes to specifically the case of America, what does the Constitution say, or what is the precedence, or how are we going to about sort of achieving certain goals? Because I think basically the 14th Amendment, which was established after the Civil War, basically because African Americans were deprived of citizenship, and the 14th Amendment wanted to ensure that no such thing happens again when people are sort of deprived of citizenship just because. And then that sort of we had a challenge, let's say, of the 14th Amendment, or when it was taken to the Supreme Court, which was the United States, Wong Kim ARC, which also established the sort of the birthright aspect that if you are born under American soil, under U.S. jurisdiction, that child is American citizen. And this is specifically what Trump is seeking to, let's say, challenge at the very least, basically claiming that illegal aliens, if they come to the U.S., if they stay in the U.S., have a child, and that the child is born to illegal aliens, that they are not under U.S. jurisdiction. Basically, this is sort of his argument, that because they are not here legally, they are not in the same way under sort of U.S. jurisdiction. I mean, that's definitely an interpretation that I think will definitely go to the Supreme Court. Now, I think, again, if we are sort of trying to build up from the Constitution, I think if this executive order is upheld, I think we might have like bigger problems on our hands uh, if like even today's Supreme Court, which I think is okayish enough with their interpretations of the Constitution, if the Supreme Court would sort of upheld this, I'd be more scared about the where we are sort of going from here. Um, uh, and I think there's also like a broader aspect about even trying to do that, because I had a discussion with James basically when Biden was trying to do the debt like college debt forgiveness or like forgiving loans, and basically it was shut down by the Supreme Court. And after it was shut down, Biden tried to find a different ways to sort of go around it. And in one way it's like really scummy, like basically you get shut down by the Supreme Court and you still are trying to like find a different ways to do it, while in this case, and even if you check some of the other Trump's executive orders, he is straight up saying, I'm going to challenge the Supreme Court, which in one way it's a scary of just hearing the sound of that, like, whoa, what you mean you're going to challenge Supreme Court? But also on the other hand, where I could view it more positively, it's like if you are coming from the best sort of place possible, you could say, well, I think there are some gaps in the Constitution, and it would be better if we get some better interpretation or sort of clarification when it comes to Constitution. I mean, that's what the Supreme Court is. There are sometimes cases where it's not really clear what, or it's not automatically clear what is supposed to happen. My worry is that Trump goal is not really, achieve a judicial jurisprudence or like have it like a really nice way of interpreting the Constitution. I think in this case, I think I'm sort of leaning closer to Alejandro's point, like maybe not, I don't know if like specifically racist, but yeah, like just problem with specifically a certain kind of people and trying to find a way to sort of deal with that.
Yes, although, well, the H-1B issue is something we'll maybe talk about. We'll probably talk about. I mean, Daniel and I were on the phone earlier, trying to think what parts of what Trump has done in 48 hours are we going to talk about? And yeah, we're gonna need a bigger boat. Like we need many shows every day to talk about everything that's newsworthy that Trump does or says. And I don't know if what we picked was the most newsworthy, but it is what we picked. And the other thing is the issue with Ross Ulbricht, who has been pardoned. He is the founder of the Silk Road. Now, I have to say, this is an issue that I don't really know much about, and I'm not sure what exactly where exactly I stand on it, but I am seeing that while we're here live on the Ayn Rand Center UK members politics group, there's a discussion around this, and I see Alex, who you all know from this show, saying that um, at least 20% of the website was stolen social security and credit cards, probably more like 40%. It was a criminal enterprise, and there were stolen goods and so on. Chris, uh, your general opinion of this decision, was it right? Are these valid points in terms of yeah, there were crimes committed, and he kind of created the platform for those crimes. So yeah.
Yeah, I think important to separate the two. So in terms of what he did, but also how and why Trump decided to do this. So on the second point, in his post around it, Trump says, this is for the great many libertarians and the libertarian movement that voted for him and supported him. So it's not an issue, a principled issue with the war on drugs, with what people do, what adults do as consenting adults, any of those particular issues. It's just about a constituency that he views as important, and sort of is throwing them a bone. Maybe that'll benefit him in the longer term, but it's very pragmatic. Sort of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I'm not doing this for the principled reason, for first principles. I'm doing this as a quid pro quo kind of thing. And then on the first element of this, what the particular platform provided, I think maybe one could also look at how Ross was prosecuted, and maybe there are some questions in that regard. But in terms of his own actions, I don't know if there's much of a leg to stand on.
Alejandro.
I remember myself researching a bit more into this case when it came up a couple of years ago, and I'm still not clear about what the truth is, because I remember some parts of the whole story that sounded so over the top that I didn't fully believe them, or thought that there should be more nuanced, the kind of nuance that one gets when one reads the whole transcripts, and I didn't have the time to do it. And because of that, I don't think I have a specific, a very strong opinion on this. I generally side on the view that he should have been convicted, and this is wrong to the extent that this person was apparently facilitating some illegal stuff, and that I certainly think it's wrong. I think that even I think it's immoral. The whole notion of permitting the trading of certain illicit drugs, which destroy the lives of people, I think that's simply immoral and reprehensible, aside of it being illegal. So I think in general, it's not a good decision. Although if I had some additional news or information that would allow me to change my view, or to think that this person Ross was a bit better, I would change my assessment.
Yeah, and when it comes to drugs, Christopher Smith says it in the chat, legalize all drugs. Yeah, the fact that there is still a war on drugs is just baffling. And I sort of am seeing the notifications from the WhatsApp politics group, and Philip mentions there that weed was legalized afterwards, sort of in many U.S. states, and I don't know if he's suggesting that this played a role, but yeah, there is a difference between to use the libertarian the way libertarians say it, victimless crimes, which is, if you could be the victim of what you're doing, but it shouldn't be a crime, like taking drugs, and identity theft and credit card theft, which is and should be a crime. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I remember sort of hearing about Ross some time ago. I think when I was like first getting into libertarianism, around that time, I was sort of heard about it. And when people try to defend Ross, they oftentimes try to say, well, he made it safer because he sort of made it a bit more, let's say, easier for people to get it and sort of not get like junk or not get like bad stuff. And basically, and some people also say that after he was convicted, or after he was forced to take down the site, I'm not sure if they like took it down site directly or how it was, but basically that a bunch of different sites came up which were even worse, and sort of that was the argument being used. Now, going sort of first to the Trump aspect, I mean, when it comes to sort of judging if this is like a principled way of doing it, well, let's see if he does anything about the actual underlying problems, which is the war on drugs, which is the fact that this was illegal in the first place. And if we'll see something in that side, I think it's definitely time for that. And we've seen countries that at the very least decriminalized all the drugs, so it's not like this would be like a unique aspect that America would go through. We've seen that in the past, and we can see it easily even here. And I think I mean, at the very least, something like legalization of marijuana like federally would be something that like should absolutely happen. And I think Trump can happen if he indeed has the sort of libertarians behind him, or sort of has the ear of libertarians. Um, Now, specifically about him, I mean, when we talk about so sort of what he was sentenced about is, for the most part, I think the, let's say, the non-violent aspects of this. I think some of the convictions were, I think I have it here. Some of them were conspiring to commit computer hacking and conspiring to traffic in false identity documents, which I think would easily be illegal even under, objective or more capitalist system. But the sentence he got were 2 life sentences and 40 years, which I think that's sort of like the biggest aspect that's going on right here. I think he absolutely did deserve time in jail. Did he deserve to basically have it as much as he did? I think that's definitely like a question we can ask. Yeah, I mean, what else is there really? I think that's mostly like I think you shouldn't be like automatically this is a great thing, and you shouldn't necessarily be also like this is like a terrible thing. Uh, it's really hard to like have like a definitive thing, because oftentimes with people who break the law, who go as far as to break the law, those are usually not sort of you are already going into like a yeah, watch the Breaking Bad. Once you start doing that stuff, it's really hard to sort of go back, and you get sort of swallowed in.
Yeah, by the way, in terms of legalization of marijuana, there was a proposition on the ballot in Florida, which the Democrats supported and Trump supported and didn't pass somehow. But yeah, it is a federal crime, even though it's legal in a bunch of states. And Trump, why didn't you sign an executive order on that? But anyway, yeah, and Enric says in the chat, he gives a title of a Wired article titled "Read the Transcript of Silk Road's Boss Ordering 5 Assassinations." Now, that's only the title of an article, so if this is part of his conviction, that's obviously um, something to consider. And yeah, Chris, the fact that he says I'm pardoning him because libertarians supported me is shocking and terrifying, and we don't have time really to discuss it, but Trump will give us shocking and terrifying, I assume, on a daily basis, and we will be here on a daily basis to attempt to make some sense of it. Parting thoughts, and where can people find more from you, Chris?
Thanks very much for the discussion, guys. Yeah, just a last point that you mentioned, the victimless crimes, and how a sort of moral get out of jail free card that is, and how many libertarians rely on that. Doesn't mean that actions don't have moral implications for the individual undertaking those. They might not impact others, but why should that be the standard? Your own life, your own values, that should be the standard. So I just wanted to throw that in there as a last point. It's a nice way to get out of moral responsibility, I think. Yeah, if people want to get in touch, very active on Twitter and on LinkedIn, as well as on Facebook, at my own account, at Chris HATT, as well as at the Center for Risk Analysis in South Africa. Thanks.
And Alejandro, parting thoughts, and where can people find more from you?
I think the next 100 days are going to be interesting to watch, not only as someone that analyzes politics, but also in the way that this thing is going to affect the whole world. I think this is something that we should be acutely aware of. And hopefully we will be chatting a bit more, screening out the good and the bad that the Trump administration brings us. Where can people read a bit more about me? You can follow the Substack of ARCUK. It should be in the description in this video. If you want to know more why I think there's some issues with Milei, specifically his character, despite he's doing good things in his decisions and policies, I have an article over there, as well as several other issues. Go ahead and take it over. I'm not the only one who writes over there. There are several interesting topics. One of them, it's about the dancing and so much more. So feel free to go over it.
So
Recommend
it's
it.
going to be an interesting 100 days. Is he going to mellow out in 98 days? Is that are you guaranteeing that? All right, we'll talk about it in 99 days and see where we are. Daniel, parting thoughts, and where can people find more from you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention something about sort of Trump's way of governing. When it came to the TikTok ban, and I'm not sure if we'll do a full episode on that. Uh, for those who don't know, basically there was like a push towards banning TikTok. It was started by Trump, then it became a bipartisan issue. It was passed, signed into law by Biden, and then affirmed in the Supreme Court 9-0 as basically this is good. And then a few days before inauguration, Trump said, "I'll bring TikTok back," and then TikTok is back, and it's now just like here. And that's sort of something that generally worries me about like the governing aspect of Trump. Again, we might disagree with the ban of TikTok, but there are certain processes I think an actual government with separation of power should take. And the fact that there is something like this that goes through the whole process, and then one guy comes back and just does this is something that's a bit scary. And yeah, you can find me on my YouTube channel, Damn Dan. Links to everybody's stuff is gonna be in the description.
Yeah, it's interesting if he's worried about China, in connection with the Panama Canal or just generally trade wars, which I think is what he thinks all trade is, but then not TikTok, or yes, TikTok and then not TikTok. That has to be some sort of a red flag as to how he operates and how he will continue to operate. And let's just hope the right people or wrong people piss him off for the next 4 years. And yeah, and either way, we'll cover it. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We are back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show.